Hello, we are live in a new event for EMCC Romania, part of EMCC Global. We have the pleasure to have together with us Professor David Clutterbuck, who is one of the founders of EMCC Global, and Roxana Mocanu, who is one of the founders of EMCC Romania. For this year is a special year. David is celebrating or having an anniversary for pioneering uh, over 45 years in coaching and mentoring. EMCC Global is celebrating its origin 30 years ago. And here in Romania, we celebrate 10 years of presence. And 10 years ago, Roxana, David, and Stefan Andrei and other peoples were together in a conference to start the presence of EMCC in Romania. What you aim for this session is, with the help of David and facilitation skills from Roxana, to understand from where we come, because we can put mentoring on the map, I think, since the ancients, but coaching is still something new for some people. For others, like David, it's already 45 years of doing it. And also understanding where we are today, we like to have future bringing back here to understand the direction of our profession. So this is a format. We are live on LinkedIn and Facebook. Everybody will be able to see the recording afterwards, and we can take comments and
Questions
questions from
for
LinkedIn
the
and
audience.
Facebook. We'll have David with Roxana talking for the about 40 minutes, and afterwards we'll discuss more about questions and our reflection about what we learned today.
Thank you very much, Vlad, for having us. Thank you very much, David, for sharing this very special day with us. For us, is a big joy and a big celebration. 10 years anniversary. I remembered that 12 years ago, I was reading an article on a coaching magazine, and on the cover we had David Clutterbuck and David Magginson. Inside, I found a very insightful article and conversation with the two friends, colleagues, and founders of EMCC. And I promised to myself to look after this new project idea until Romania will be on the map of EMCC. Documenting and preparing this conversation with Vlad, the first curiosity we have is how the idea was coming to your minds, and what were the first moments you have decided, together with some other colleagues, to found EMCC 3 decades ago.
Okay. Is that's my cue, is it, Roxana?
Yeah, this is the first question for you.
Okay. It all started at a conference in London by the Work Institute, as it is called now, and it was a general conference on people development. And David Meggins and I met there for the first time and realized that we were together pioneering different aspects of mentoring. I had written the first book on mentoring for the mentoring programs in 1985. It came out at the same time as my good friend Kathy Cram in the States wrote her book on her research, which was about informal mentoring in a small number of sample of people, 20 people, 20 pairs in the States. And that set an interesting stage for a very different interpretation of what mentoring was. So David and I got together, very quickly formed a friendship, and we said we must have a conference. And in organising the conference, which was held, the first one at Sheffield Hallam University, we found ourselves forming the European Mentoring Centre, as it was then. Eventually, we changed the name to a European Mentoring and Coaching Council, and I'll explain why later. But that first mentoring conference, it deliberately brought together people who were practicing as coaches, as mentors, because nobody had heard of coaching to speak of at that point. Back in the early 1990s, you had a few people saying, I'm a coach, but most people who were coaches, 99% of the people who were themselves coaches were instructors. They were traditional golf or tennis or other instructors. And we had Timothy Galway had written his book in 1974.
Yeah.
But it was really not made
the inner game.
Yes, the inner game of tennis, the inner game of golf, and it hadn't really started to make any impact. John Whitmore's work really was only just beginning to be noticed, and hadn't been was much later than 1985. So all of this we came together. We brought people in companies, we brought practitioners, and we brought researchers together to create a whole community to look at what was good practice and to spread good practice. And it was called the European Mentoring Council, and then the European Mentoring and Coaching Council, because our focus was Europe and the great diversity inside Europe. And in some ways, it was also because in America, they seem to have gone in a very strange direction with it in terms of mentoring. They completely misunderstood the story of mentoring in the Odyssey. And they mixed up Athena, the goddess of martial arts, with Athena, the goddess of wisdom. But in Europe, which traces mentoring back to the court of King Louis the Sun King and the cleric Fenelon, the first leadership book in Europe. Very much mentoring is about helping somebody else become wiser, and all of the things that we think about in terms of the qualities of a good learning conversation, listening, asking good questions, being person-centered, and so forth. These are all characteristics of mentoring. So then we found, and what started to be called mentoring by the ICF and other people was really a very narrow form of mentoring, focused primarily on performance. And John Whitmore's work was really about performance. And it didn't really address the creation of a human being, the holistic development of somebody. So the EMCC came about to try and look at good practice, and therefore it set up the first repository of research materials. When everything went online towards the end, in the early 2000s, we basically gave that to one of the universities, because it's so much easier to get materials on coaching and mentoring now. But we brought together people from multiple European countries, particularly from France, from Scandinavia, Italy. We had the Bocconi Business School. So it was a European endeavor. And that diversity immediately had set one of the key principles of the MCC. And that was that it would be diverse. It would respect the different values, the different cultures that people brought to coaching. And that's something that remains a strength of the MCC. The MCC encourages every national body to to create its own presence in terms of coaching and mentoring. Sure, there are fundamental principles we share, but it's not about imposing a particular dogma or way of doing things. It's about releasing the creativity and the identity and the cultures that form the MCC.
Mhm.
So that's where it all started, and so it's those critical principles, evidence, the diversity, the evidence base, what clearly based in research. What do we have evidence for? And that's those two principles I think are really important: inclusivity and evidence based. In the late 1990s, we had all of these people calling themselves coaches, who who were desperate to establish their reputation and businesses, and they ran up against this big problem that there were people doing what they were doing, only more holistically, calling themselves mentors, but doing it primarily for free.
Uh-huh.
And that was a big challenge for them. So what did they do? Well, starting in the States, they started, and it was helped there by the misunderstanding of mentoring. They tried to say, oh, well, coaching is really non-directed conversation. Mentoring is just directed telling people stuff. And of course, that was nonsense.
Mhm.
It took a long time for us, for between sort of 1995 and 1999, we spent a lot of energy just saying, no, that you're completely wrong. Go away. um, and then we said, look, that's not inclusive. And so we said, look, if we're doing pretty much the same thing, but mentoring is much broader, let's join forces. And so John Whitmore came in, Julie Hay, a whole bunch of people,
Okay.
primarily in the UK, but also across Europe, came together to say, right, let's make this body, rename the body, and continue what we were doing, but let's call it the European Mentoring and Coaching Council. So those are the origins.
Okay. So on my list of founders are these names: your name, David Clutterbuck, David Magginson, Julie Hay, John Whitmore, Sir John Whitmore, and Eric Parslow. Am
Correct.
I right?
That's
Okay.
right. And there were lots of other people who had a role to play too. Bob Garvey, for example, towards the end of the 1990s, was very, very active and still is a great figure in this. There was somebody called Anthony Felstead, who was a trainer at one of the in the government service. So there were a lot of other people who had a significant role to play. But the key people, the people who really shaped it all, were the ones with those 5 or 6. Yeah.
How did you put all together your competency? How did you succeed to complement all together in order to bake the first bread of the EMCC?
I'm not sure I understood the first.
How did you succeed to know each other as founder members?
Yeah.
To know each other, to put together your competencies, complement to each other in order to produce the first, I know, could be a product, standard. I said to bake the first bread,
Yes.
to have the first product.
Yeah. I think we all knew each other already, particularly in Europe. We had some contacts with people from the States, and we used to invite particularly people in mentoring from the States to come over. We didn't see much of an evidence base in coaching at all. And back until well past the foundation of the turning of EMCC into EMCC. So real evidence base from the States really didn't start until well into the 2000s, and Australia actually was there first before that with Anthony Grant and his colleagues. So, but then it's mushroomed, of course, and it's changed a great deal. But we all knew each other from being at conferences together, from writing together. And so it's very quickly we knew that we had a lot of interests in common in getting some clarity around what was this thing that everybody was calling coaching, because people were still calling coaching the old instructional model right the way up until the late 1990s, early 2000s. It's only then that the volume of literature tips from being mostly instruction to being what we now recognize as modern coaching. So we knew each other. We were all concerned to make that change, to help people do this really well, and to help companies understand what it was they were buying when they bought coaches, for example. So that was the drive behind it. And then the MCC was, of course, the first to launch a series of standards, rather than we took make this distinction between competencies and standards. And part of the reason for that is that a competency framework assumes that it's all that you've got one set of competencies and they apply in all situations. That's not true. And the work that we've been doing over recent years into coach maturity reinforces this. You can't do a nice tick box exercise like the ICF basically does. And equally, you can, if you assume that just having, so you've got these competencies to begin with. So at a foundation level or an ACC level in ICF, you can be tested for doing those. Then at the next level, you do more of those and deeper. It's not true. The journey to maturity is about leaving behind that simplistic stuff and having a new identity as a coach. It's the journey to mastery involves letting go of all that stuff. And so becoming a capable and competent coach is more about what you stop doing, and it's doing less and being more. And so the notion of growth as a coach and becoming a really effective coach is much more tied up with the sense of there are things that you need to be able to do, but it's what you build on top of those that come from within you that's more important than having a big toolkit.
Okay. This is very, very interesting what you just shared with us. Do you think EMCC did its job very well and fulfill its mission?
I think we're still working on it. EMCC. I'm trying not to make too many comparisons with ICF, but there are some big differences. ICF is essentially a business, and it's run as a very tight business. Therefore, it's got to control a lot of things, which is one of the big pushbacks in terms of the decolonization of coaching. That it's not about that one model developed in the States does not necessarily apply everywhere else across the world. And there's a global pushback against this idea of one model of coaching. So EMCC is much more a collection of people from different backgrounds who are concerned not with building a business or making money, so much as actually developing the whole environment of coaching and mentoring across the world. Yes, we support. It's good to run webinars and so forth that support people in thinking about their businesses, but it's much deeper than that. And therefore, as an organization run by volunteers, it has the inevitable inefficiencies that such organizations have. So what we have to look at is there's a trade-off in terms of size. The EMCC could be much bigger than it is if it were determined to be a business, but it's not. It's determined to be a force for good in the world, and that's the primary reason for being there.
Okay, so touching people's lives and people's destinies, no matter we are talking about professional destinies or
yes, exactly.
Destinies.
And EMCC is there not just for people trying to make a living out of coaching. EMCC is there for people inside organizations who need to use coaching as part of their being a leader. It's there for the HR profession in terms of understanding how to use coaching and mentoring. It's there for for government to be and social movements to be able to bring about change, social change. And so it's a very different and broader picture of what we're there for. And that's one of the reasons why there are relatively few. Let me rephrase that. It's one of the reasons why the mix of people in EMCC is what you might call more senior, more serious coaches.
Okay.
There are you come to this because you have something to contribute and want to contribute, not because you're trying to build a little niche business for yourself and create a life pattern for yourself. Of course, there are people for whom that is the case, but intriguingly, most people who belong to EMCC, everybody that I talk to sees them their role in EMCC as and their business as part of a bigger picture. They are contributing something wider.
Okay. Thank you very much. I remember one of the MCC conferences. It was in Turkey, in Istanbul, and I remember one of the most passionate debate around the differences between coaching and mentoring.
Yes.
It was a big. How can I say a big challenges a big challenge for the panel for all the contributors, and the moderator invited everybody 7 minutes earlier for the break. So that moment I had the impression that all the audience will burst like a big fire, because nobody get the answer. What's the do we still keep the differences between coaching and mentoring? Is it important or not? I also remember the other day we had another meeting, and we could not start to enter the main topic of the meeting before we got a resolution on that. And my question today for you is, how can we keep the profession fluid while still talking about the differences between coaching and mentoring?
Okay. Well, fortunately, I think we've resolved that very neatly in recent years.
Okay.
And the answer to this is that well, part of the answer comes from the research that a whole group of us have been doing over several years into coach maturity. And one of the outcomes of that is that, and in this research, we've interviewed dozens of very, very experienced coaches around the world.
Mm-hmm.
And almost without exception, the way that the most mature coaches describe their practice includes mentoring. They have melded coaching and mentoring at that senior level into one practice.
Mm-hmm.
They use themselves. They use their gestalt a lot, but they also use their own experience. And they use their experience to craft better questions, to empathize better. And so the two things are intertwined. As a beginner coach, you've got to do all this process stuff. You've got to have a model to follow and all of that stuff. Mm-hmm. And so that low level coaching is very different from mentoring. That low level coaching can now be done better by an AI, and increasingly the AIs are stepping into that space. That's really dangerous for coaches. But the difference, the simple way of defining it, is to think of coaching and mentoring as both being contained within three circles. And in the center circle, you've got clarity around yourself, your aspirations, your values, your identity. And in the outer circle, you've got clarity around the outside world, your champions, the way that the technology is changing, the opportunities for you. And what coaching and mentoring do, they're the circle that links those two circles. So a bit like a bullseye, but it's the second, the mid of the three circles. And then that's the coaching and mentoring conversation. The coaching and mentoring conversation links your deeper understanding and clarity about your internal world with your deeper understanding and clarity about the external world. So you can make better decisions. Now, if you are doing pure coaching, whatever that is, you are primarily focusing on the individual's internal world and a little bit on the external world. You might help them think about how they deal with their stakeholders. But you are, but you, because you don't know enough about their external world, you cannot draw upon experience to craft great questions or to give them context. And this myth that one or the other gives advice and the other doesn't. No, neither in coaching or mentoring do you give advice. If you give people context, some information that will help them with the quality of their thinking. When you do that, when you're giving context, you're enabling them, empowering them. When you give them advice, you're disempowering them. You're doing that. You're actually making the decision for them. And so abandoning this whole idea of advice is not relevant in this picture at all. Mentors put a bit more emphasis on the external environment because they can.
Okay.
Coaches put less emphasis on the external environment because they can't. When you come to be a really mature coach, you have such a wealth of experience in all sorts of worlds that you can actually do both. And that's the difference. So it really is an argument that is no longer has any meaning. Simply, it's a matter of the coach's maturity as to whether they are a mentor.
Okay. Good. So we solved this big problem between the practitioners and researchers and authors and so on. And thank you very much for that. One of the, let's say, side benefits of mentoring is that it allows to build bridges between the generations. And now we have a workforce accommodating 5 generations. Is for the first time in our, how can I say, working history.
Yeah.
We try to champion a better world of work. Also organizing, enabling conversations between these 5 generations. Tell us about the mentoring power to enable this conversation and also to create a business ecosystem, an economical ecosystem, which is appropriate to young generations' aspiration, to the other generations.
Yeah.
How does it work?
So I think we're in the midst of a major movement away from a typical North American view of mentoring as being hierarchical. So I've got all this experience, so I'm going to share some of it with you.
Okay.
Away towards much more a much broader, more inclusive form, where basically mentoring is a co-learning relationship.
Yes.
It's all where you learn together, and if only one party learns, it's not mentoring anymore. It's teaching.
Yeah.
And therefore, creating the wherewithal for both. You don't bother to call one mentor and one mentee. You are both co-learners or co-mentors, and this is how you grow. People at the top of organizations need to be learning faster and faster, but don't know how. Having younger people. Excuse me, let me get rid of that.
It's okay.
People at younger levels, they have all this experience that they can share, not only about their generation, but from the technical perspective, for example. And one of the biggest areas that we are now working in is reciprocal mentoring. We've had reverse mentoring, which is all about a junior person, perhaps from a black minority ethnic background, or from maybe somebody who's from a different sexual preference, working with a senior person to themselves, and helping to educate them. But that's but that's only affects the lives of a couple of people. The senior person learns what the world looks like through the eyes of the junior person, and to some extent, if it's really well managed, the junior person learns about the world of the senior person, and maybe they get some insights into how to manage their career and get an understanding of the politics in the organization. But it only helps two people. Now, reciprocal mentoring is much bigger. It brings together pairs of mentors, and junior and senior, who already have a co-learning relationship, but it brings several pairs together to look at how we change the systems in the organization, the policies, procedures, and attitudes, and ways of doing things that create the inequalities in the first place. That is so much more powerful. So for me, the big movement in mentoring in particular is to make it much more of a co-learning relationship.
Okay. And by the way of the generations and co-learning relationship, I have recently read research made by Gary Hamel.
Oh, yes.
The research is called the Facebook generation versus Fortune 500. And among the main points, I will quote few. With the Facebook generation, all ideas compete on equal footing. By the way of hierarchies. Hierarchies are natural, not prescribed. And the leaders serve rather than preside.
Absolutely.
What's the role of the leader as a mentor? We had run a lot of programs as a manager, as coach. What's the contribution we are expecting with all these generations around from leader, from the mentoring point of view?
So, from both mentoring and coaching, the role of the leader is not necessarily to be the mentor, to be the coach. It's to create the culture where mentoring and coaching flourish. Where it's the part of the way we do things. I greatly enjoy when I get the opportunity to work with chief executives of organizations and help them. By giving them feedback, basically watching them, mentoring and coaching, and helping them to grow into the role and become the champion for mentoring and coaching in their organization, encouraging other people in doing that, and listening to other people, being coached themselves, and or being mentored themselves. So I think this whole area of being much more fluid about it. The problem is, or one problem is, that in a recent study we did for the conference board, we looked at post-COVID leadership.
Okay.
And while many leaders have had to relax and let go of the command and control style that they had when people were during the crisis, many of them now want to bring it back. But people don't want that anymore. They're pushing back. That's why we have the great resign, or one of the reasons. The conclusion by some of the HR directors is that a high proportion of their top 200 or so as leaders are now obsolete. They are unable to match the style to that required from the people that they serve, or when they cannot get the idea that they are servant leaders.
Okay.
That's going to be something that's a real challenge. And I think for coaches and mentors, it's one of our biggest challenges, is helping these people to let go. And there's a lovely phrase that came out of some work that we did a while ago with leaders who were with a leader who could not let go, and that was, do you have the balls to be more vulnerable?
Good question.
Lovely question.
Yeah. Thank you very much. And we have the first question coming from our beloved audience. Thank you very much, Liliana Urzicianu. I will read the comment for you. I like a lot the description about maturity of a coach, combining the awareness of the external world with the internal one. David, how do you see the maturity of a coach versus credentials and assessment processes in place?
Okay, well, depends what credentials you're talking about, basically. Yeah, if it's a tick box, a credentialing, we cannot see from the research that we've done. I'll say a little bit more about that. We have done over the years a number of coach assessment centers where we basically get coaches to do a 45-minute to an hour coaching session, which is observed by 2 expert observers consistently, and all of those coaches will have an accreditation from somewhere. Consistently, 70% of the coaches assessed cannot actually hold a purposeful, meaningful coaching conversation. Full stop. So basically, they've not got beyond that first level of doing coaching to somebody. And so that's a real problem. So the accreditation they have is a hygiene factor. It just says you've got some knowledge. It's like being able to read all the notes, to be able to read music, but not play it.
Yeah.
And so the accreditation process tells you whether you can read the music. It doesn't tell you whether you can play an instrument.
Okay. We'll stay a little bit in this area, in the same area. Actually, I will quote you a thought coming from Adina Terry. It's one of the old conversation we had in the past together. And Adina said, good to listen to you, David. And what are your thoughts on, do standards give greater freedom and flexibility than competencies, which are a bit tick boxes?
Absolutely so. What the EMCC standards and the EIA, or the European Individual Award process, is based upon having a portfolio of evidence. Can you show that you can coach? And it's not about can you jump through little hoops and tick boxes. It's about showing what you've achieved for clients and their experience. It's a very different, and showing that you can reflect upon your experience. In the maturity studies, one of the critical factors that we found is the quality of the coach's reflection. Now, when I do work with coaches around the world, new coaches in supervision, what I find is that for many of them, they may have been practicing for years and have never had supervision before, which is scary. But they haven't. Okay, just lost ourselves for a second there. Yeah, so I think that's quite scary.
Okay. So can I ask from some advice on how to build yourself as a how to build yourself the mastery in coaching or mentoring?
Yeah, I think it's what the research tells us is it's all about what you let go of. So letting go of the need to control the conversation, letting go of the need to have the next question, letting go of smart goals, and letting the goals evolve as things go along. All of these things, they're things that we need to do less of, not more of. Letting go of tools and processes. Yes, the bigger the toolkit you have, the more confident you have that you can pull a tool out of the kit whenever you need one. But the mature coaches have a bigger toolkit and use it less.
Okay, thank you very much for that. We've talked about the past of the professional association you have founded. Can I ask how do you see the future of our profession and practice?
It's a lovely question, and obviously we don't have crystal balls, but we can see a lot of movements happening. We can see the big shift towards the valuing of supervision. Now, it's only in recent years that ICF has started to recommend supervision, and the vast majority of coaches don't have professional supervision. They may have what's called a mentor coach to help them build their business, but that's not the same thing as supervision. It's a very nowhere near. So supervision is the key is key to reflective practice. So I think increasingly we're going to see serious coaches putting more and more energy into supervision. And we've been seeing this movement very right the way across from the beginning of the EMCC. It's gathering a lot more momentum. We're going to see a lot more coaches becoming team coaches, because that's how you add significant value. And if I build a hierarchy here, we can add value as a coach or a mentor to an individual. So one-to-one coaching, mentoring. We can add value to that person at the next level by helping them, that leader, to become a coach and create a coaching culture in their team. We can add value by becoming a team coach, working and working with the leader in their team to build that greater coaching, that greater environment and learning ability within the team. We could add even greater value if we coach teams of teams. We can add even greater value if we coach organizations and consortia organizations and global movements. We have layer upon layer upon layer. We as coaches are starting to get deeper and deeper into the systemic view of things. And I think that's a critical factor that we've seen in the transition from individual coach to team coach. It's that deep understanding of systems. So we have linear thinking, which most coaching is based upon. You've got a problem, I'm going to help you solve it. We have systemic thinking, which says, well, let's look at what your stakeholders think and negotiate with each one of those in a linear way. And we've got complex adaptive systemic thinking, which looks at the whole system and the interactions between all the parts of the system, between the stakeholders, for example, and looks at how the influences that can be created here to make the whole system effective. This is going to be needed more and more as the issues that coaches and that leaders and organizations and countries face become more and more interconnected. We're going to see, and we already are seeing, wars over water, for example. But they can be resolved with coaching. I think geopolitical coaching is one of those great areas that I can see happening. And I don't even know where to start at this stage, but I think as a coaching profession, we need to start building the idea of geopolitical coaching.
Okay.
It's a fundamental thing, and I think for us to be aiming for. So all of these layers, we've only started. 99% of coaches are just doing one-to-one coaching. What we've got, we've got at least 5 or 6 layers before we get to geopolitical, and who knows what's beyond that. I have no idea. But those are the levels that we can see or imagine right now. That for me is one hell of a vision to go for. So that's just one of the big things. I think another big thing is the whole issue of coach education. If AI can do better what beginner coaches do, how are we going to help people go in that process of moving, of becoming mature coaches without going through all that learning process at the beginning? That's a real challenge. And the answer we are playing with is it appears that the creation of coach AI partnerships is going to be really important in the next decade or so. So how do we as coach educators educate coaches to work with their AIs? How do we educate the AIs to work with the human coaches? I think these are just two of the big questions that we have to ask. The other big movement that I see is that coaching is the democratization of coaching. Now there are platforms like Better Up that talk about democratization of coaching, and it's not. It's about making coaching a little bit more affordable to people in developed countries. But it doesn't affect the people who need coaching most. In the people that cannot even afford school books and things like that, or shoes to put on kids' feet. Coaching and mentoring need to work to those. We've got a program which we're launching hopefully later this year. We've just been going through the proofs of the learning materials for the under 12s, which is aimed at creating 5 million school-age coaches and mentors to change to take these things into the mainstream of society. Everybody can. It's like mathematics. Most kids learn mathematics at school. Very few need to become accountants or financial or bankers. And it's the same way. If coaching is a skill for everybody, and mentoring is a skill for everybody, yes, there's still room for people who are experts. And that's where the role of coach will be. So that basic level coaching is something you learn at school and learn how to do. And over time, you can decide to make a career in this area. Then you have to be at that much higher level. So people are going to go faster through the levels of maturity. So these are just three big areas that I'm very passionate about.
Okay. I have 1,000 questions in my mind, but I will ask the last one while I invite all the fellow colleagues to prepare their comments and questions in the chat box. David, what will be your legacy in terms of practice, research?
Yeah, I think the thing with the school children, I think, is one of my most important things that I want to leave. It's very interesting. People, when you say legacy, people often look to what they've done or what they haven't done.
Okay.
And I'm much more interested in what I haven't done yet.
Okay.
So other people would decide about the legacy, the past. EMCC is something I'm really proud of having helped to create. But it's all the people who came together to pick up on it and tell me to basically right, we'll take over from here. Don't interfere, but do help. And that's, I'm very happy with that. But for the future, it's finding those areas, continuing to find those areas which are not explored. We just put to bed and sent out to the publisher a new book on coaching in a politicized environment. How do coaches work with politics inside organizations? Fascinating. And so we've developed a diagnostic to test how politically savvy are you. Are you neatly in the middle, or are you politically naive, or are you a manipulating sociopath? So basically, to get a sense of where you are, one would be useful for using with your clients. I think also in the democratization and decolonization of coaching, I want to leave a legacy there. So I'm doing things like I'm doing pro bono supervision for coaches in Africa to build the capacity of coaching in Africa. So these are all things I think are they're powerful motivators for me, and I'll continue to find new areas where we can work and actually build some scientific rigor into coaching, but also expand coaching, enable coaching to take up some of those challenges that I was referring to earlier.
Okay, thank you very much.
It's one other thing. I'm going to do it because it's fun.
Yeah. Okay. Vlad, any questions from our colleagues?
I was more competitive. I was thinking, how can I distill to 100 questions for David? First of all,
We've seen some of them for you to look at. Yeah.
I'm glad that most people who will watch us will recognize what I recognized, that we have in EMCC Romania the DNA of diversity and inclusion, and we are a warm organization with professional courtesy. And I realized, listen to David, that somehow we are aligned in values, and I am sure that most of our members are with some intention to contribute to society, and it's aligned with our aim for the next years. We have for the first time a vice president with focus on diversity and inclusion. We aim to bring connection with society, with politics, and I am glad David made so clarity about geopolitics, and to get with all the other areas of society. I was wondering if we'll bring coaching in the school, and children will learn to have a good dialogue among themselves. Will be coaching and mentoring needed further?
I'm sure we will. I'm sure what you learn in those, it's just going to be setting the boundary higher. You know,
Yeah.
go back not that many centuries, and people were basically counting on. If it was above 10, you couldn't count it. Um, Now and then, but now of course we can do brilliant to count in so many more complex ways. We set a higher standard, and that sets a higher standard for coaches. And those coaches who are really serious about it, who are committed to their own growth and the growth of society, they're going to thrive. I must say
And
that with one thing you said, you talked about DNA. Um, when the unraveling of DNA, the human genome was announced, um, all those years ago, I was a young journalist on a magazine called New Scientist, and I wrote up about this, not realizing just how momentous it would turn out to be. But I got the DNA, and I said DNA does nearly anything,
yeah,
and I think that fits for what we can do.
We
Coaching.
leave it with the DNA.
indeed. And it's one fine line that I think you could bring us more clarity. It's about the intersection between coaching, mentoring, and psychology.
Yeah.
You already mentioned Gestalt, and it's clear that coaching and mentoring, it's quite hand in hand with psychology theory.
Theories and
Yeah.
theories, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, we see that coaching is adopting more and more of evidence base from psychology and from social science. At the same time, we see that many psychologists are also becoming coaches because they can see the value of integrating the two disciplines. The British Psychological Society, one of the biggest, probably the biggest in Europe, has a whole group on this. And one of the discussions we're having at the moment is launching a group supervision for coaching psychologists, so that all the people in the group would be both psychologists and coaches. And I think that's a whole area we expect to take if that gets off the ground. I think that will give us so many new insights.
Indeed. Yeah. Actually, from my side, it's fascinating, and it's a profession where you, at least some of us, want to be. And I left with another important thing from discussion with you the importance of understanding self. If you want to be able to help others, which most coaches and mentors want, first you have to understand yourself.
I agree 100%. Not that we ever can fully understand ourselves, but we can do all sorts of things. We can become more mindful, which gives us the time to reflect on ourselves. We can challenge our assumptions. I like to find the opportunity every month to challenge an assumption I have. And it may not be a big, deep assumption, but it's something that that affects the way I think and makes me realize how stupid I was. So that's part of my reason for writing my 75th book, which is about reflecting back on 45 years in this whole field, was to show was for me to actually recognize how dumb I used to be, and to reflect forward. Well, probably if I in 10 or 15 years time, I'm going to look back at me now and say, God, you were dumb, David. If I can't look back in 10 years' time and say, David, you were dumb then, I probably won't have learned anything in between.
Yeah.
Okay.
Very nice.
We have two comments here. One is coming from Adina again. The value of experience cannot be simply replaced by skill. Senior coaches and mentors will always be needed. And Liliana, I take with me the quality of reflection.
Yeah. Yes. It's fascinating, I think, to reflect on our own and to reflect with others. And there's this simple little 4-part framework that so many people have found useful. And it's when we reflect, to think about how we think, to think about how we feel, to feel about how we think, and to feel about how we feel. And just stopping from time to time and choosing any of those or all 4 of them, just to analyze what's going on for me right now.
Okay.
That for me is one of the most useful tools for really understanding ourselves.
Very nice said. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the time, wisdom, and energy you are investing to grow EMCC, the local chapters, the global organization, and I wish you good luck with the next 45 years of practice, David.
Thank you very much, Roxana and Vlad. It's been
Thank
a pleasure.
you very much, David. Thank you very much, Roxana. Thank you very much, Adina, Liliana, and all those who reflect besides us watching live. Everybody can put questions and comments in on LinkedIn or Facebook, and we hope for the next occasion to meet with David, with Roxana, and with other members of EMCC Romania and EMCC Global.
In person.
In person and in always reflecting about, and this is something that for Romanian it's very hard, reflecting how dumb we used to be.
Not part of our national DNA.
To understand how we grow.
Yeah. Well, it's not so much reflecting how dumb we used to be, reflecting how dumb we are.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah.
Okay. But that's great.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much,
David.
All of you.
Thank you very much, Roxana.
Bye.
Go safe, everybody. Bye then.
Bye.